Kjetil, I wanted to bring you into the conversation. Your perspective, and I just wanted to, again, you come with this background as well of having been very active in the land-based movement as well, and how you think this plays into what could happen this year.
Yeah, I just want to comment your original question a little bit first, because I agree about what's said, and one of the things that I see is when it comes to smaller players, like if we take out the top 50 and we go a little bit lower to all these like small family-owned companies, I see that there are there are various margins across regions, of course, and they're very vulnerable. A lot of the smaller companies are located in low margin regions. And if you take into consideration the fact that they're not integrated, I think a lot of them have seen the pandemic as kind of an eye-opener on how actually vulnerable they are when it comes to the market conditions which we are in. And has actually pushed a few of the smaller players into consider, like, is there a future for us as a very, very small salmon farmer? And if you add on top of that, a kind of a generation shift where the younger generation coming in, thinking about taking over, and they see like, okay, what is actually the route going forward? We should maybe spend a lot of money building a brand or integrate ourselves, but we are actually too small to do that. What is our options going forward? So I've seen some movements when it comes to smaller salmon farmers considering and generation shift, kind of a cocktail of kind of bring some transactions to the table here. So that's very interesting to see how that moves going forward.
I think this question actually over to Kjetil, because I know that you've had an awful lot of first-hand experience with the land-based players, and the last time we spoke a couple of years ago in New York, that your firm had just Billund, which has been a major player in building these plants. I mean, what's your best guess on how the RAS, the big new RAS players, will come in on a cost basis and compete with coastal farming?
First of all, like, a lot of things have changed since we bought into Billund, and I left the Billund board last summer, and there's been tremendous changes in the order book from and the type of facilities which were there. But first of all, just would like to comment on the fact that my view is that Movi is probably the largest land-based player. So they have most fish on land. They just like put it into the sea when it's at a certain size. So I see a lot of like competence development and R&D happening inside certain small facilities around the world. So from my perspective, all large farmers are just like experimenting and building competence, ready to make the move when the time is right. And when it comes to the large kind of the new players, the Teslas, which were mentioned here, I don't see volume coming out in the market which will disrupt the price in the near future. So I see that current land facilities produce around 50% of the design capacity. And I think that will be also the fact a few years from now. And I also have experience with building such facilities, which I usually use to like 2 + 2 + 2 rule, like 2 years of just planning, 2 years of building, and at least 2 years to get the facility up and running. So in the future, of course, the supply demand curves will meet, and it will be an issue for Norwegian's airborne salmon in, but at the current pace we are at, and the current projects which have started construction, I don't see any like issues in the 5-year future for Norwegian salmon to not be competitive when it comes to price. And also land-based facilities, when it comes to price, it's all about scale, of course. And we haven't seen anyone producing at such a scale which will actually meet the costs which we have seen in Norway yet. So when it comes to cost, of course, we need to see how the kind of the big 10,000 tons facility is developing. Do they actually produce 10,000 tons? Because then we will see actually what is the actual cost, because we have never seen costs, which actually are comparable because it's all in Excel spreadsheets at the moment. So yeah, so for me, it's still a way to go. It's very, very interesting to see how the largest players will react, but I don't see any I don't see in the next 5 years that we have anything which will affect kind of the price and the competitiveness of the Norwegian industry. But of course, maybe in 10 years we will have some movements when the volume from land-based and kind of the land-based facilities which are close to markets are actually producing at the capacity which they are designed for, and therefore can meet a cost per kilo which is relevant. 0.3% of the salmon production were produced on land in 2019. So there's at least a couple of years to build and a couple of years to start production. So I can't see any volume which will disrupt the market in the next 5 years at all. I don't see how it's practical.
The point on Atlantic Sapphire is super interesting, right? They missed some of their numbers last year, but it's huge. I think somebody just mentioned that it's the kind of the leap. I think Kjetil, you said the transition from what's on a PowerPoint to what we're actually going to see now that, like, for example, Atlantic is operating at a higher level. Do you think, for example, that is going to open the doors for more finance if we see some good numbers from Atlantic Sapphire?
Yeah, of course, and I think it's but I think it's very important to prove this at an industrial scale, which has never been done before. And I think that's kind of a key question that everyone is waiting for: is are we able actually to produce at design capacity, to be able to do good, tasty fish, 4 kilo to 5 kilo slaughter weight every week, so we can have like a stable supply chain in and out. And I haven't seen that yet, so I'm very looking forward to Atlantic Sapphire being able to deliver on the plans. And I think that will, of course, make more money flow into land facilities, and we'll maybe see the traditional farmers get off the ground. And this will probably happen faster than we think, but still, I just see some bumps in the road before we're up and running at the volume which actually have impact on the supply-demand balance. As I mentioned, 0.3% of the salmon last year were produced, or in 2019 were produced on land. So there's a way to go since the market is growing even more. So.
Kjetil, I was keen to ask you about, there's one or two questions from companies that are developing RAS projects around the world. And I think there's some interest in the level of investor appetite for new projects. Maybe you could address that question. I mean, we've seen a lot of money chasing projects, but how easy is it for an entrepreneur in this space to find investors?
I think there are, we're seeing a lot of capital go into the space, but I know there are at least like 100 projects which have not been able to gain capital. So I think it's still pretty challenging, but still it's moving. So I tend to advise everyone just to try and to get out there and try, because it's. From my perspective, I've been very surprised what project has actually been able to get capital and what projects has not been able to get capital. I guess that relates back to what were mentioned, like who's able to sell and actually have a really good pitch in the end. Because what's mentioned here in the end, a lot of the projects has the same technology and the same suppliers, and it all goes down to the kind of the whole storyline around and kind of that believe in the future. So I don't know if that answered the questions, but
I've got two more questions. I hope you guys can just stick around for a few more minutes and we'll wrap it up. The last two questions, Kjetil, what is your view regarding, I'm going to give this one to you. What is your view regarding technology risk for the land-based projects? Are the technologies currently being adopted by various land-based players in the world that much different from each other? And I think just to add my own twist on that question, we do still see failures at the post-smolt facilities being ramped up by the conventional salmon farmers. Just recently, Nova Austral had one with a new plant in Chile. What's your take on that, being so close to the,
since I've been investing in land-based technology for many years, it's a very relevant question. But my view is that it's not a problem with the technologies. The problem is, and the challenges are related to scaling that technology, because it's not a problem to produce salmon on land. What is an issue is to produce a lot of salmon, tasty salmon, sizable salmon every day, every week. That's the challenge. And when you want to do that at certain scale, you need to scale the technologies, and there are challenges. But I don't see that as a technology problem, because the technology works. It's a scaling problem. And then I also see I see facilities which has exactly the same technology. They are a living organism, so they're not running like it's a living organism. So even though you have two exact same technologies, there are changes in waters, and there are changes how the people work, like how much the pumps are actually pumping water. So there are like a facility it needs to be learned. And when it comes to this facilities, as you mentioned, which is a Billund facility actually in Nova Austral, but it's of course that when you build a facility the first time, it's often like, my grandfather died of smoking, but he started smoking when he was young, but the problem didn't occur until he was older. And that's kind of what we see in all these farms too. Like, it can work for maybe 1 batch, 2 batches, 3 batches, but then suddenly the problems occur. And the problems can be related to wrong equipment or how people manage it, and changes in water, for example. And that's one of the issues that I've seen most of, is actually how the intake water change over time, and actually how that change the biofilter, and therefore how the facility actually operates and acts. And you change feed, you put in different types of water and feed types in all the time, and all this affects the production. So when the fish die, you can't blame it on the technology. There's so much factor to blame it on. So to refer back to your question, I don't think it's a technology issue, it's a scaling issue, and it's a competence issue, and a learning curve issue.
And it does seem to be of the is that you get risk the project, doesn't it? Because we've seen on the Atlantic Sapphire presentations, when they get to a higher tonnage, the impact of a failure in a unit becomes less impactful as the larger they get.
Yeah, and I think it's one very relevant question for a lot of farmers is that, what type of risk profile do you want to run your farm at? Because if you the farm can be designed at the density of, say, 100 kilos per cubic, but what will happen if you lose a batch or if you lose a batch of big fish, it will affect your farm tremendously, and the economics, you'll probably be bankrupt. So you will probably end up producing at lower risk, having fewer fish, which will kind of in the end also hurt your EBIT per kilo, which will probably make the fact that no, you're not as profitable as you thought, but you're running at a lower risk. So these are all like relevant questions which I haven't seen kind of the proof of yet, but I believe that's one of the reasons why the current land-based salmon farmers are running at a lower capacity than the design capacity. Is because the risk profile they want to run their facility at is a little bit different.
Right.